FAIRtax is coming, don't stand in the way. FAIRtax is coming across the USA. FAIRtax is coming, clean up this mess. We got to get rid of the IRS. Hey, hey! Hey, hey!
Hello and welcome once again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
And we are the FAIRtax
FAIRtax
Guys.
Guys.
Kind of going back to square one here with FAIRtax Power Radio.
Yep.
People ask us, why bother with the fair tax? You want a list?
There's even some people defending the current system, which kind of boggles the mind when you start to think about it. But there's one thing I wanted to start with, folks, and that's a geezer alert, okay?
Uh-oh. Well, you're well qualified to give it. Go.
Yeah, yes, I am. I'm officially a geezer,
Yeah,
and I'm
me
proud
too.
of it. All right. Now, just if you're a young person, a young professional person, and you're wondering, who are these two old geezers talking about the tax code, and why should I listen? The current tax system is hurting you, all right? And, Bob, it's our intention to explain that in detail, why the current system is so bad. And it is hurting you. For instance, doesn't it rankle you that you have to pay the government before you bring your paycheck home to provide your family? That's just one small example. So listen up. We promise to be as educational as possible and even a little bit entertaining from time to time.
We'll work on that. But this reminds me, Ron, of something I saw in the newspaper the other day. It was a columnist, I believe the lady wrote for the Washington Post, and I don't recall her name. But she was trying to make the case that the IRS, a robust IRS, is the honest taxpayer's best friend. And she was basing that, well, of course, that kind of thinking is rooted. Yeah, I see you're laughing over there. That kind of thinking is rooted in this inside-the-box kind of mentality that people have got that says the income tax, we've had it forever. It's the only way that we're ever going to fund the government. It's here to stay. Let's just live with it. So once she makes that assumption, then she goes on with a two-pronged attack, one of which says, and she just wrote this out, the tax code is complicated. People need answers. And when the IRS has all these budget cuts and can't hire enough people to answer the questions they have, then she says that's a bad thing. We need to, fully fund the IRS so they can answer all of the questions that taxpayers have.
Do they answer the questions?
No.
When you call the IRS toll-free helpline, do you get it at first? Do they pick up the phone? 50% of the time, they don't.
Yeah, well, this columnist was saying that's because of the budget cuts. We need to restore the budget and get all these people back online. But I say let's point to that 1986 Money magazine thing, where they sent out a hypothetical family and asked 50 tax professionals how much does this family owe, and they got 50 different answers.
Yep.
So I don't care how many people are there at the IRS. The tax code is so doggone complicated that, professionals can't deal with it, much less just individual Joe Blow taxpayers.
Yeah, I think the people who work at the IRS have an impossible job. They have to try to explain and help people with a code that is unexplainable. I mean, it's just not possible. Like you said, with those 50 different tax preparers, those are professional people that know what they're doing. And they got 50 different answers. I think in one of the subsequent tests, trials, they got 49 different answers. Two people actually agreed. Woohoo! Jeez.
Oh,
So
yeah.
It just boggles the mind. But you're right. It points to the fact that we've had this tax code, this income tax code, so long, 103 years now, that it's all that some people are used to. They can't think outside of that box, all right? And I know it's mind-boggling to you and I, but to other people who have not heard of the fair tax, the income tax is all they know, and they've actually grown comfortable with it. Well, don't get too comfortable, because it is eating us alive. Mm-hmm. I think that was the term that Audrey Pruitt used. So
yes.
It is eating us alive, and it's getting worse every day, and it's hurting us. It hurts our economy. I shudder when I think what it's going to do to my grandchildren. It's just terrible, and so we've got to do something about it. Now, we're going to continue with some of the problems with the current system.
Yeah, I was just saying. Also, the second part of this columnist argument was that because the IRS has been, so horribly cut back, according to her way, that they don't have the manpower to go after tax cheats. And so the solution, folks, is really simple. One, you get rid of the complexity. You pull this 78,000 pages out by the roots so you don't have a system that generates so many questions. And you design a system that is just much, much harder to cheat on. And apparently neither of those thoughts crossed this columnist's mind when she was writing that thing. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't gone into all the details of the FAIRtax, but we will in subsequent episodes. But how do you cheat on a sales tax? All right?
That's really hard.
You go into a store and you say, hey, buddy, I'll make it worth your while if you don't charge me the tax. You'll be out of there in your keister.
Well, and we're getting a little off here, but the FAIRtax is included in the price. How can you do that when it's included in the price that's on the item? But let's get back to what we were talking about. Why we need to get rid of the old system. You've got three major areas in which the IRS is not a taxpayer's friend, honest or otherwise.
Yeah, evasion. We know that the evasion, that is... Now, there's a difference between avoidance and evasion. Avoidance is legal. If you're using the tax code and the loopholes and the deductions and everything that's legal in the tax code to reduce your tax burden, that's okay. You're obeying the law. Whether you're using software or you're a large company with batteries of CPAs and tax attorneys, if you're avoiding and reducing your tax burden using the law, that's fine. It's evasion that's the problem. And evasion is terrible. I've got an article here. It says and they're complaining that the IRS can track your cell phone. Huh? The IRS can track your cell phone? Yeah. It says IRS can track your cell phone but leaves billions in uncollected taxes on the table. While the Internal Revenue Service continues to leave uncollected tax money on the table, the agency has beefed up its surveillance capabilities and moved alarms both conservatives and liberal piracy advocates. Now, the next sentence is what gets me. Now, some complain that the IRS is acting too much like Big Brother and not enough like the traditional tax man. Now
they're just figuring that out.
Now they're just this was dated just a few days ago, and these folks have just figured this out. This is from Economy News. I got news for you. The IRS has been out of control for a long time.
Yeah, but let's get back to one of your fundamental questions there. Why does this tax gap exist? How can we have taxes that are owed that are not collected?
Yeah, well, there are people who underreport their income or they just don't report their income. There are people who fly under the radar. It's very possible to do because with an income tax system that depends on you reporting your income, all right, there's no way to really verify it. Well, if you're getting a W-2, from your employer, yep, that's kind of hard to avoid. But if you're not here legally and you're earning money, if you are here legally and you just choose not to report it, there's just all kinds of things. There's all kinds of ways to avoid it.
Stash it offshore.
Yeah. And the thing of it is, I can't remember the figure for what the total taxes collected by the IRS, but the evasion is getting up towards $600 billion. $600 billion with a B, as in Bravo. That's crazy. We're approaching $1 trillion in evasion. That's not a good system. And like you mentioned, Bob, the person who wrote that op-ed wants to restore the funding to the IRS. They've got an impossible job. They will never be able to bring us to anywhere close to 100% compliance because it's not possible with this tax system.
The system itself is just so fundamentally flawed, it's not possible for it to work.
That's right.
But it's the only one a lot of people have ever known, and our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to get people to understand you do not have to live with an income tax. There is an alternative. We can get rid of the income tax in its entirety, replace it with this retail consumption tax, and everybody comes out so much better.
Yep. Now, evasion is bad enough. I mean, it's a terrible problem. I suppose the only light at the end of the tunnel is that people in Washington are recognizing that the evasion is a horrible problem, and people on both sides of the aisle are recognizing that the current tax system is going to collapse under its own weight, and we need something else. And I suppose that's good. I mean, you have to kind of hit them in the head with a 2x4 to get their attention, or something to that effect. But you've got to. They're recognizing that this is a terrible problem and we need something different. So that is going to force some real tax reform in Congress this year.
I would hope so, because our deficit is growing. Our national debt is up close to $20 trillion now. And we need to collect every penny of tax that is owed. And this system and again, it's not necessarily the fault of the IRS itself or the way it works. It's the fault of the system. It just doesn't work.
And the burden falls upon the people that get the W-2s because they can't evade. They get a W-2 from their employer. It's reported to the IRS. There's no way that they're going to evade very much at all. So greater and greater burden are falling on the people who can least afford it. Let's get rid of it. Another problem we have is fraud. I know fraud is a huge problem with our tax code, but even this article made my jaw drop. This is from Forbes. IRS paid $5.8 billion in fraudulent refunds. Identity theft efforts need work. Yeah. From 2011 through October of 2014, the IRS has stopped 19 million suspicious tax returns and protected more than $63 billion in fraudulent refunds. $63 billion in fraudulent refunds. Now, they got away with $5.8 billion with a B. So fraudulent refunds to the tune of almost $6 billion are going out. That's our money, folks.
Yeah. Why have a system that allows that?
It's crazy. And it goes on to talk about it there. But that to me, with 19 million attempts that the IRS was able to stop to the tune of $63 billion? Holy cow.
How many did they not stop?
Yeah.
No way
exactly.
to know.
How many did they not? So fraud is a terrible problem, and it's costing us, folks. All right. This one is kind of mind-boggling too. There was recently, while they had they invited IRS Commissioner Koskinen up to Congress to talk to him a little bit. Commissioner Koskinen boldly stated that the IRS is struggling to ensure illegal immigrants are able to use illegally obtained Social Security numbers for legitimate purposes.
One more time?
Yeah. That's because this is so illogical. Commissioner Koskinen boldly stated to Congress that the IRS is struggling to ensure illegal immigrants are able to use illegally obtained Social Security numbers for legitimate purposes. What legitimate purposes? And how can he sit there with a straight face and say, yes, we're trying to help illegal immigrants, get these other people's Social Security numbers so they can get these fraudulent refunds? It's mind-boggling. And the man sits there with a straight face and tells this to Congress. I wish I was in the room at the time.
Oh,
anyways,
mercy.
More fraud. More fraud. It's unbelievable.
But I tell you what, the one that really galls my gizzard and should gall everybody's gizzard is the abuse part of it. This lady that was writing for the Washington Post was trying to make the case that the IRS is the honest taxpayer's best friend. I will bet you there are hundreds of honest small business owners who have been busted by the IRS for this structuring thing.
Yeah.
And you might want to hit on that a little bit, what it is, and they just run roughshod over the entire Bill of Rights in the process of doing it. So the IRS is not your friend when they show up at your door and say, we're taking your bank account.
They call it civil asset forfeiture. All right. There's a law that says if you deposit $10,000 or more in a bank account, you have to report it to the IRS. Less than that, you don't have to report it. And there are people that run small businesses. Now, we talked about this in the last episode. You can go to YouTube and look up the video for Carol Hinders. That's a good example. It's a short video, like a little over 2 minutes. She runs an all-cash restaurant. And so obviously she has to deposit that cash into the bank on occasion. Well, even though she's not violating any rule or law, the IRS swooped in there and seized her bank account because they say she's structuring. She's trying to avoid the $10,000 rule by making smaller deposits. No, she has a cash business. She has to put the cash in the bank on a regular basis. It's no big deal. They didn't call her up and ask her about it. They didn't investigate it. Somehow, and I'd like to know, how the heck did they know what her bank account is?
Why is the government watching how much money you put in the bank?
Yeah.
That's, you talk about big brotherish.
And this
Don't want any of that.
This has happened to hundreds of people across the country. People that run convenience stores. You know, a lot of sales in convenience stores are cash. And you have to do something with that cash. You're not going to just keep it around. You need to put it someplace safe, in the bank. And this has happened to convenience store owners and so forth. So that is a violation. Well, it violates Amendment 4 in the Bill of Rights, protection against unreasonable search and seizure. All right. As far as the IRS is concerned, if you've done this and they've seized your money, you're guilty. That's it. No due process. No trial by jury. And then, you know, the other aspect is that we have religious organizations that want to maintain their nonprofit status, so they have to be nonpartisan. We've actually encountered some of this, you know, because we are the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association is a 501c3. We're nonpartisan and nonprofit. And somebody tried to accuse us of being partisan in some event we were having, and we had to clear that up because we are careful to be nonpartisan. We criticize everybody. We don't care. So for the religious organizations, being very careful to maintain their impartiality, it's a freedom, you know, they're violating their freedom of religion and freedom of speech. You should be able to criticize the government, you know, whenever you feel like it. But no, the IRS says no. So the abuse on the part of the IRS violates at least 4 of the Bill of Rights. And that's a good reason to end it too. And again, as Bob has said before, the answer is a much simpler system. We just don't need all this craziness.
Yeah, folks are trying to figure out how to rearrange the deck chairs, you know, the proverbial deck chairs on the Titanic, with the idea in their head that the income tax is the only way that's ever going to be because that's the only way we've ever known. And getting people to realize you do not have to put up with this monster. There is a better way to fund the government. You don't have to have a big chunk of your check withheld from you before you get it. You don't have to pay payroll taxes. You don't have to feed the government before you feed your family. If we just get rid of the current system, the system is rotten, and we need a better one. And there is a better one.
And it's better for the country. By the way, we didn't give out our email address, did we? So if you have questions, you have comments, you don't like what we're saying, you do like what we're whatever, you know, our email address is thefairtaxguys@gmail.com. Go ahead and send whatever you like, thefairtaxguys@gmail.com. And we will do our best. If you have a question, a legitimate question about the fair tax, we'll do our best to answer it. And we're backed up by some experts that if Bob and I can't answer it, we can get the answer from one of those experts.
And also, we got a Facebook page. Go to Facebook. Everybody's there just about. And look up the FAIRtax Guys. Yep. And you will see why we're on the radio and not on television. Our beautiful mug pictures are up there.
In fact, I was able to, I don't think I told you this, Bob, I was able to fix our Facebook page so that the address is facebook.com/thefairtaxguys.
Oh, I didn't know it was broken.
Yep, very simple. Yep, sorry, I forgot to tell you about that. But yep. So, Facebook, the 4th Thursday of every month, there's a webinar. You need to register for the webinar. It's another way to learn about it. Go to fairtax.org/webinar. That's it. You need to register because they'll send you a link, and then just before the webinar starts, you click the link and you're in. It goes to one of those services that links everybody together. So it's another good way to learn about the webinar and tell your friends and relatives and so forth. Hey, you want to learn about the fair tax? Go to this webinar. It takes like an hour and 15 minutes. The 4th Thursday at 8 p.m. And it's a good way to learn about the fair tax. We're talking about replacing the entire federal income tax system. So you really need to learn about it.
That is beyond some people's comprehension. Let's hit that one more time. We're talking about replacing the income tax with a retail consumption tax. And a lot of people, will toss out stuff like how come we're going to have this new tax on top of everything we're doing? They don't hear the replacement part. No, this is not going to be a huge tax on top of what we're already paying. We are going to get rid of the way we're collecting taxes now and just do it a better, easier, anonymous, simple, fair way to do it.
Yeah, anonymous is very important. And to make sure that one is not added to the other, the 16th Amendment must be repealed. You cannot let Congress have the authority to implement a sales tax and an income tax because we know Congress can't control themselves.
Yeah, quick history lesson. In their infinite wisdom, the Founding Fathers realized that an income tax was a bad thing.
Yeah.
And the way they wrote the original Constitution, an income tax was unconstitutional and was held to be such by the Supreme Court in the late 1800s, which is why in 1913 they finally had to get through an amendment, the 16th Amendment to the Constitution, that specifically allows the government to levy an income tax. And the fair tax is predicated on that amendment going away.
Yeah, it has to be.
Of course, an act of Congress like the fair tax cannot in itself amend the Constitution. There's a process for doing that. But it's written into the law, the fair tax, that if that 16th Amendment is not repealed by the regular amendment process, then the fair tax sunsets and you get your income tax back because we will not have both. No way.
And, it's election time, or it's coming up to the big national election, and we have a number of candidates out there saying that they're going to give us a flat tax that's going to do away with the IRS. Well, a flat tax is still an income tax, and you may call it something else, but a flat tax is still an income tax. You still have to have a federal agency to collect it. We started with a flat tax 103 years ago. It didn't stay flat very long. It started, the maximum rate in 1913 was 7%, and that was for extremely wealthy people, extremely wealthy. Within 4 years, of course, we got into World War I. Within 4 years, they raised that rate to 70. That's what happens when you give Congress the authority. I mean, they could raise it to 100% if they wanted to. I mean, that would be foolish.
Yeah, I was just thinking, what would a postcard size income tax return look like? Probably, dear Mr. Miller, how much money did you make? Add 10%, send that in.
Yeah,
but even if you had to report the number on the first line, that's where the enforcement comes in. People will underreport that.
And people who advocate the flat tax, just ask them one question: how long will it stay flat? My wife is very good at doing this. Well, let me ask you one question: how long will it stay flat? And that look, that blank stare, and the realization is not going to, is it? No.
That just means the politicians and the lobbyists get to go through all the process of selling favors all over again.
No, the lobbyists love the idea of a flat tax.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because they get to start all over again.
Yeah, because
the people who
the
work
congressmen do, because the lobbyists have all the cash.
Yeah.
And that just means they can resell all of the stuff that they've sold in the past. If a flat tax wipes it out, they'll just sell it again. Can't do that with a fair tax. Not possible.
So there are huge problems with the current tax system. Evasion, fraud, abuse, those are three main categories. I think, we're trying to make the case that the current system is unwieldy. And there is a lot of realization that it is going to, collapse under of its own weight. We've got to come up with something else.
Yeah, but you got to get people thinking outside the box. You can't keep thinking that an income tax is here to stay. No, it isn't. We can and we must get rid of it.
Yeah, because obviously the person who wrote that article that you referenced to, they need to have a little creative thinking there. Isn't that what we always tried to teach the kids in school? Creative thinking, creative problem solving.
Oh, now don't get me started on what's going on in the schools these days.
But
with this new Common Core math, how in the world are you going to do a tax return with that?
All right, let's stick to taxes. But we need some creative, out of the box thinking, like Bob says. You are not stuck with the income tax. There is another way. The American people have to let their Congress critters know that we cannot go on much longer with this income tax. It's getting worse and worse. Evasion is going to be up towards $1 trillion probably within 5 or 6 years. How are we going to do it? We have to do something, and a flat tax ain't going to do it. The fair tax is.
Yeah, the beauty of the fair tax is that it was not hatched by politicians.
Yeah.
It was hatched by economists.
Yep.
Funded with private money, who were given a blank sheet of paper and said, design the best tax system possible. The sky's the limit. You've got a blank sheet of paper to work with. Figure out what's the best way to fund the government at its current level. And they could have come up with a flat tax. They could have come up with a VAT, the European-style tax. They came up with this consumption tax, which later got the label fair tax hung on it. But it was designed by the private sector to be the best tax system possible. Of course, the best tax system is one where everybody's rate is zero, but, that's not really realistic.
No, it's not realistic. And, the legend behind the fair tax is that there was 3 businessmen in Texas, wealthy businessmen, that got together for lunch or something, and they were complaining. I was at a board meeting. We spent all our time, 80% of our time talking about taxes, 20% of our time talking about the actual company and the business of the company. We need to do something, and the challenge went out, well, let's not just complain about it. Let's do something. And so they put their money together and started studying. All right, what would be involved to come up with a better tax system? What would a better tax system look like? Would it be a flat tax? What would it look like? They had no idea. So they got some people together and they did some research. So the fair tax, like Bob said, it didn't come out of Congress. It didn't come out of a congressional study. It came out of the private sector. Now, some people try to criticize it. Oh, yeah, those business people, they just want to make things better for themselves. Well, business does create jobs. A lot of jobs, okay? And would you rather have a tax system come out of the private sector or Congress? Come on, let's think about this.
Well, I just like the one that lets me bring home my full gross amount every month.
Yeah. And, as time goes on,
the government helping itself to my money before I get it.
Yep. And you know what, Bob? You're sounding like that routine that I've heard about. You might be a fair tax fan.
I might.
Yeah, so we're going to get into that in subsequent episodes, but we spent the last 2 episodes reviewing the problems with the current system. The current system is just unwieldy. We just have to do something about it. Yeah. So I hope you understand, if you listen to the last 2 programs, that the current system cannot be fixed. You cannot just make it a flat tax and think everything's going to be hunky-dory. It's not going to work. All right?
But you've got to make your voice known, and the 2 best ways to do that. One is to join Americans for Fair Taxation.
Yep.
If the people here that are working on the ground in Washington to get the fair tax in front of the people that it has to be there, they can point to it and say, we represent X number of people, and the bigger number that X is, the more power they're going to have.
Yep.
And so joining Americans for Fair Taxation is quite just incredibly important.
We need your membership.
And make your politicians understand what you're thinking by talking to them on PopVox, POPVOX.
Yeah, that's a great website. Started by a couple ladies in D.C. It's now like the universal place for checking out pending legislation, any legislation that you care about. All right, you go to popvox.com. You can weigh in. You put in you register with your name and address. That way, they know what congressional district you're in. And when you go to like HR 25 and say I'm in favor of the fair tax because of these reasons, it actually sends a letter to your congressman and both of your senators.
All right. And again, let us encourage you to talk with us with our email, thefairtaxguys@gmail.com. And if you've got an IRS abuse story, I would love to hear it. Post it on our Facebook page, The FAIRtax Guys on Facebook.
Yeah, or just email it to us, thefairtaxguys@gmail.com.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, that's time flies when you're having fun, doesn't it, here, Ron?
Yep, half hour's almost up.
So we've got to wrap up this edition of Fair Tax Power Radio. Hope you'll be with us again next time. Tell your friends about it. We're on this new platform called Spreaker now,
yep.
which is really cool. Check that out.
Yep.
But until we meet again, I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
The Fair Tax Guys reminding you the fair tax is America's big solution, and once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
The USA.